Welcome to Artsplanations, the podcast that is for non-artists, artists, and everyone in between.
We talk about art and try to explain what we think about it, and as artists, why we think that way. We ask questions to try and bridge the gap between viewer and creator to make the art world more accessible to everyone.
Hello, and welcome back to the conversation. I am Andrew Molcheski, and with me as always is
Joanna Bolsons.
And today we're going to talk about a particular artist, one Mr. Frank Stella.
Yeah, he's one of your favorites.
Favorite's a strong word.
You like him more than I do, for sure.
Yeah.
I've never really cared for him, but I know you were really excited to talk about him, so we're going to do an episode on him.
Yeah, excited's a strong word.
Well, you're the one that put him on our to-do list.
I did because I think he represents an important facet of growth in both American painting and the progression of art in general.
Okay, well that's a great way to start. What makes you think that?
Well, he was one of those artists in the New York New School in the 1960s who really helped to push the abstract expressionist movement into what we kind of know of it today. One of the things that he's really well known for are his black paintings and then his Protractor series, where he took, that basic idea of the canvas, the square or the rectangle that you have, and he broke that apart and started making these odd-shaped canvases and painting on them.
So, two things. Whenever I hear the term abstract expressionism, I think of a lot of movement, a lot of loose, broad brushstrokes, or just loose, broad marks,
right.
If it's a drawing or something like that, whereas his is way more controlled.
Yes.
It's very graphic designy, like solid color, solid bright color, very flat.
Yeah.
So he's just not somebody I think of when I think of abstract expressionism, which is kind of strange.
Yeah, but that's why he helped push abstract expressionism.
Because he had a different approach to it.
Right. He wasn't, the action painter or the person who was just like, abstraction is expression.
Right.
His approach was, one of the things he's very well known for, like you said, is that idea of taking the graphic design of the era, the 60s, and those bright day glow colors, and they kind of marrying them with a kind of architectural kind of feel to them, where everything is this large, very geometric.
He's kind of, to me, he was kind of the bridge between the pop artist and abstract expression. He took the same color palette and the same flatness of pop artists and the same kind of highbrow intellectualism of abstract expression. And he was kind of in between those for me.
That's actually a really interesting way to think about it that I've never even considered, but that's a really good point, because you're right, he does have that flat kind of pop art aesthetic, especially with the color choices he uses.
Like if you look at Roy Lichtenstein and his group that he's thrown in with, abstract expressionism, to me he's in between.
Yeah. And
maybe that's why he had such a longevity and such a reach. He's not really solidly in one group or the other.
Right. I mean, we should say that Frank Stella is still alive. He's a living artist who still makes work today and still talks about making work and being an artist.
He is still alive?
Yeah.
I knew he was like...
He's older. I think he's in his 80s.
I knew he was like alive in the early 2000s. I didn't know if he's still alive.
Yeah, he's still alive. If you start to do research on him, he's had like 15 million retrospectives of his work in the past like 10 years, because he's at that age now where he's been making work for 40 or 50 years.
He's like Cher, Elton, just constantly doing a farewell tour.
Yeah.
So there were a couple of videos that you sent me, because you're more of a fan of him than I was, or am.
Yeah.
I definitely have more of appreciation after watching those videos, and we'll link the videos that we used in our research on the website, but there was one old black and white interview, he's so young in it, and I just thought some of the things he said was pretty interesting. He talks about how his paintings, when he was first starting out, were cold and intellectual. I don't see them as cold because of his color palette. It was too bright for me.
But
other than the black paintings.
Yeah, I was about to say the black paintings, which were the ones that first kind of put him on
the map.
Really.
Which they're just these large black paintings, very geometrical. But to me, they're still not intellectual. And the reason I say that is because he also, in this same interview, talks about how his work is more presentation versus invitation. And I like that. He said, my work is what it is. I'm presenting it. I'm not inviting anybody to look deeper into the painting. I'm presenting it as it is. But that, to me, that's an intellectual approach to describe your work like that and to use that language. But the work itself, to me, wasn't intellectual. You didn't have to study it for hours on end to understand it. It is what it is.
Right. And I mean, I totally agree with that, because especially like the Protractor series or the Black series, where you have that kind of, minimalist kind of aesthetic, it's all, he's taking design aesthetic. He's taking, color and line and shape and form, and he's combining them into a pleasing image to look at. And like, yeah, you can look at it and you're like, oh, it's a cool looking painting.
Yeah.
And you get what the presentation is.
He wasn't even the first to do such differently shaped paintings.
No.
I think he was the first to do it on such a repetitive approach, where it was every single work was a different painting shape, canvas shape or whatever. But he wasn't the first to do that either, and that kind of bugs me. But one of the first ones I always think about is Typolo's allegory with Venus and Time. It's an oval shape, but it still has these little flourishes or whatever on the canvas shape. And it's one of those, it's like, that's not your standard rectangle, either vertical or horizontal. Like, it has a gilded frame that comes out at little points and stuff like that. So, like, the odd shape, to me, that's historical. We've seen it over time. I think he just gets a lot of credit because he did it on, like, every piece of his. Because the one I always think about, Typolo's, it's from, like, the 1700s.
But yeah, I mean, he definitely wasn't the first one to break the bounds of the rectangle in painting. Frank Stella.
Mm-hmm.
But he was definitely someone who I think took that idea of doing a painting that wasn't, the rectangle, and really pushed it into, like, you can make paintings and have them have curves, have them, like, the actual framing device of the painting. It's still on a flat plane. It still follows all the typical rules of painting, except it's no longer stuck to this plane of the rectangle, the window that you're looking through, the framed device.
He also, I don't think he was the first one, but he definitely pushed the new medium of metallic and aluminum paint, right?
Yeah. Well, he was painting on aluminum as well.
Oh, okay. Which I wonder, that's got to be helpful when doing these unconventional painting shapes, canvas shapes. If you're doing aluminum, you can just cut it down. You don't have to worry about stretching it and the fabric folding over the stretcher.
Well, so a lot of them were still stretched canvas over these kind of shapes as well.
Oh.
And that was the other thing, is like he paid attention to the fasteners and painting the sides so that everything was like, it was all one concept of painting.
I saw a video where he like tapped one of his old paintings from whenever he was first starting out, and it sounded like hard plastic. Like, it's not what you would typically think of when you tap a painting, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I know in one of the interviews he talked about how, he originally started breaking that like rectangular form because he was using 3x3s and putting them together because it was the cheapest materials he could get. He was a Baroque art student, and he's like, and that was something that just carried over as he continued to practice. Like, that was, not only was it the cheapest, but at the time it was also the best way to do it. And as prices change, it still was the best way to do it. So we just kept doing it that way.
Well, and if you like find your style and you find something you're comfortable with, why change it? Yeah.
But that's the other thing, is if you look at his oeuvre from the black paintings through now, it always changes. Like, I really like his early stuff in the 60s. Those Protractor series, even the Black series a little bit, and some of his newer sculptures. But there's a lot of stuff in between that gets really busy. And really, it looks almost like someone who's just learning how to do Photoshop and learned about layers for the first time. And so they copy pasted like 100 layers to make a picture. It almost looks like that, but...
So what are the Protractor series?
The Protractor series are a group of paintings that they generally have a name from I believe it's a Roman city, and then a Roman numeral that delineates whether it is a angle, a curve, or something else. So if it's 1, 2, or 3, it's not like the number in the series. It signals whether it's like has an acute angle, an obtuse angle, or something else. And they're all these like rounded curves that have like the shape of a protractor or something else, and then these lines of color. Really bright, really colorful. And if you think, when I think of Frank Stella, that's what my mind originally goes to.
So I wonder, whenever I think of Frank Stella, I think of the squares, specifically one like the concentric square where it's just rainbow. It's a square painting, and it just slowly goes down into the center where there's a border of every color. Very, as somebody who grew up with Lisa Frank, you would think I would love it, but it just looks really boring to me. It's just a rainbow square. But I also think of one of his was, I'm going to mispronounce this, Haragla Variational.
So Haragla Variational is I think it's one of the Protractor series. But it's like 2 half circles that are on end of a square.
Yeah.
Of the same size, and then there's a pattern, interlacing pattern made by the different colored bands that kind of like follow the shape of the square and the half circles in and outside of the square, which I'm sure is a horrible description of this
we'll
thing.
Put it on the website. But like whenever I think of Frank Stella, that's what I think of, and I just, for whatever reason, I just don't like them. They're too flat. He's mentioned playing with flatness and depth, and I'm like, those are contradicting things. You can't play with flatness and depth when you don't have any kind of depth in your work. I don't know what he meant by that. It's what bugs me. I mean, I don't see it.
Well, when you say flat is the depth, and I look at it, I think, oh yeah, it's flat because there's no perceived depth in the way that the painting's put, but there is depth because you have the perception of things going over and under and interlacing in the way that the bands come together. And so you get this layered effect that, something goes under something, there has to be a depth there. I think that might be what he's talking about.
I didn't read it like that, and I can understand that, but he doesn't have any kind of shading on the colors. If they do go underneath it, it's all flat color no matter what. So even if it's supposed to be going under, you can't really tell because there's no shading.
Right. I don't know.
And maybe that's where the whole it's presentation versus invitation comes in. Yeah. Like, he didn't want to have to think about, well, this one's going underneath here. Maybe he didn't want to have to think about mapping it out and finding the road of the color or whatever.
Yeah, and I mean, with that presentation versus invitation, I've heard him say before where, like, his work, like, he can't determine how the viewer is going to view his work because he doesn't know the viewer. He doesn't know what they're bringing to it, and so he doesn't make work for that purpose. It's, for him, he knows what he brings to it, and that's good enough for him, and that's all he's concerned about.
Well, that's a good way to think of it, because, yeah, everybody's going to come at it either with an attitude or with open arms, because they're all coming with their own preconceived notions, so you might as well just make yourself happy.
Yeah.
I also saw an interview where he went to his longtime friend Philip Johnson's The Glass House. Mm-hmm. So The Glass House was a house. Philip Johnson was another artist, and he built this home that was all glass. I think the only thing that you couldn't see into was the bathroom.
Yeah.
But he lived there for like 30 years or something like that. It's now a National Historic Site, so I think you can go and visit there. But it was after Philip had passed away, Frank went and visited the house and kind of talked about his relationship, and they visited the museum, or the gallery on on the same site, and it just looked like a giant concrete wall that kind of goes underground. And Frank was talking about how he originally hated the idea. He didn't understand what Philip was doing. But as he's going through, he like talks about how over time he grew to love it. Which, when we're talking about the idea of perspective, the viewer coming at a piece of work and like you can't tell what they're going to think, your perspective is going to change over time. So I really appreciated hearing Frank say, yeah, originally I hated this, but now I kind of think, oh, this is really cool. This does look really neat. The walls were carpeted, and you could also move them, so they were almost on rollers.
Oh.
So he was able to to shift how something might be presented.
Yeah.
And he had his work in there. His friend had hung his work up alongside all these other people that they must have been friends with. So it was just really kind of cool to hear him do kind of what we do, where he's having an artist talk with himself because his friend passed away, but he was like, yeah, I told him I didn't understand what this was.
Yeah.
So I enjoy seeing somebody admit to not understanding something and growing from it.
Yeah, and that is the nice thing about Frank Stella, is that you can see him talk as a young artist, still coming out of school, and just, you can tell he's very much not full of himself, but very confident in his success as a young artist, and trying to talk very much using the language of someone who went to a New York school of art.
He sounds kind of jaded too, which is kind of funny. I'm like, you've been accepted, man.
Yeah.
For those of us struggling, you should be grateful.
Right, but then you listen to him talk now as a 80-year-old artist who's been doing it for 40 years, and there's a lot more of just. It seems like he's a lot more what's the word? Where you're not jaded and you're not full of yourself.
He just sounds a lot more of accepting of differences.
Yeah, I think just accepting of differences, but also just this is what it is. It's not anything more than that. I am who I am. I made mistakes. I'm not perfect in everything I did. I'm not some super.
Yeah, it's just like an old man. It's like talking with my dad. Growing up, he was probably cocky. Well, I know he was. He's told me stories. Super cocky and confident. And then he had kids, and he realized he had no idea what he was doing. Then he raised his kids, and now he's just this little old man. He's like, yeah, I don't know everything, but you know what? You should just love everybody. It's kind of like that.
Yeah. But it is interesting to hear him continue to talk about his work, because you can see how his perspectives have kind of shifted and changed.
I very much, as somebody who does not like his work, I very much appreciate the newer interviews where he has 80 years of perspective to talk about and give advice from, versus the old black and whites where he's just super cocky and he's talking like he just read Jansen's Art History Volume 2. Yeah. He sounds very insular as far as his language. Yeah. Nobody's going to understand you unless they've studied what you've studied, and you like it that way.
He sounds like a grad student.
Yeah.
Who's talking about his thesis after he's just spent 6 months researching all these other people talking about the same thing.
Which can be really polarizing. I mean, we started this because we wanted to bring everybody into the art world, because we think it should be accessible for everybody. And so hearing that language, super frustrating for me, because I'm like, no, you're trying to make yourself feel superior when you just said your art is what it is. There's nothing else to it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if he was trying to make himself feel superior.
That's what it felt like. When you start to use language that only people who have studied for years can understand, and you're doing it in an interview that's then going to be broadcasted to the nation, that to me makes it seem like either you don't understand how few people will understand that language, or you really want to sound like you know what you're talking about.
I mean, it's like talking to someone in the military. You ever had a conversation with someone who's in the military, and you bring up something in the military, and all of a sudden they throw 7 acronyms at you, and yeah, the FPO down at the AOE told me to SCC, and then PRA to the PT, and you're like, what did you just oh yeah, sorry, we use acronyms in the military, and you're like, I don't understand that because I'm not in the military. And just that's the
talked to a
language
lot...
that they use in their industry, and I think he's just using the language he's used to in his industry.
I don't think that, though. Because I have family and friends in the military, and yeah, they might use an acronym every now and then, or a phrase or something, but they'll kind of catch themselves and be like, oh, it means this. Same thing with my work. I work at a law office, and I might be explaining something to you, and I'll stop myself like, oh, that it means this.
Right.
But with the art world, I feel like whenever an artist, especially at that level, is presenting themselves and trying to basically sell themselves, because you are selling your work constantly, whether you're at an auction or not, you're constantly trying to sell yourself as an artist. It comes off really douchey to me.
Right, but he's talking to his industry. He's talking to another art critic.
But he wasn't. He was talking to an interviewer.
Who's an art critic?
Who was going to broadcast it on television. Not every viewer is going to be an art critic. Some people just might have an interest in art, but they're not going to be able to understand your language. Or if they understand the individual words, whenever he's stringing it along to make himself sound like a scholar, it's going to make yourself sound pompous.
I didn't read it that way at all.
I did. His younger interview.
Yeah.
I absolutely did.
I didn't see that at all. I just thought he was somebody in his industry talking to other people in his industry.
I didn't see it that way at all. Because he was also talking about how the art critics in the industry, they didn't understand him. Or not that they didn't understand him, that they had questions about it or something like that. And he tried to make himself sound like an outsider, even though he wasn't. Like, he just sounded like a spoiled kid to me.
No. It's not how I read it.
I did.
That's interesting.
Well, do you have a specific piece of his that you like?
I mean, when it comes to his work, like I said, I like his earlier Protractor series. Ran 2. It's just one that I saw. There's like, oh, that's a title I can remember. But pretty much any of them I like.
But why? Why do you like them?
Because they're colorful, they're bright, the size of them is like a good. I've always seen them in museums, and they have a good wall presence at that size in museums. And because they're bright and colorful, they attract your attention. But they're simple enough that I can be like, yeah, it's it's decor, it's decorative, but it still has enough going on that I'm interested in it visually.
How long do you think you would stare at one of his pieces?
I mean, at the same time I would stare at anything that wasn't like classical realism.
Well, how long is that?
I don't know, 5 seconds?
That's just interesting to me.
Come back for another 5.
That you enjoy his work, but you wouldn't stare at it for very long.
I don't stare at things for very long unless I'm studying them to try to figure out how it's done. Like, when I look at a work of art, like if I were to look at a sculpture by Houdon or Brancusi or Rodin, when I stare at it, I'm not staring at it because I'm appreciating the form or the shape. I'm staring at it because I'm trying to figure out, where did they push? Where did they pull? What marks? Like, what did they do to get this here? What techniques did they use? What were they looking at? What are the shapes to describe the form so I can use it? You
can't really do that with his because it's very flat. It's very
I know how
straightforward.
Yeah.
I just find it interesting that if you like the work, you wouldn't look at it for a longer amount of time. I
like the work that we have on our walls, but I don't look at it. It's there. I see it. I acknowledge it, but I don't study it. I don't stare at it and like contemplate it. It's just not how I view art. When we go to a gallery, I spend about 5 seconds looking at a piece, and I go on through everything, and then I go back to things I like and try to figure out how it was done and what I like about it, and then I move on. That's just how I've always been with looking at things. I mean, do you spend long periods staring at stuff
if I like it or I'm interested in it, if I'm trying to figure it out, like you said, if I'm trying to figure out how that mark was made or something like that, yeah, I'll study it. If I enjoy a piece, I'll stare at it. There are a couple of pieces in the house that I'll just kind of like, if I'm thinking about my day or just trying to like decompress, I'll sit on the couch and I'll stare at it. It's just kind of relaxing.
But then he's also, I mean, in the 90s, Stella started making sculpture, which I'm on the fence with.
So he didn't start off as a sculptor. He only did paintings, right?
He started off doing painting. Then he had a print shop in his studio in the early 60s. And then, and that's the thing with his work, is it's constantly changed. Like, he eventually left that flat line stuff that he's really well known with behind. And, like, he could have kept doing that till now and just kept doing it and made, stupid money doing the same thing. But he was constantly doing new things and trying to experiment and pushing what he was doing. But in the 90s, he started doing sculpture. And like I said, his sculptures are kind of, it's like someone found Photoshop for the first time and just did hundreds of layers of things. I think they started off coming off the wall because he started using like wooden protrusions in his paintings.
And the painting itself started to come off the wall, or
Yeah, and then he started just like, he said the only difference between a sculpture and a sculpture is a painting that's been pulled off the wall and like wrapped around or something like that. Like that was like the way that he thought about sculpture is there's no difference between it and painting. It's just a painting's on a wall and a sculpture's not.
You might be talking about the ones that I've been thinking of, where they're very slick and smooth. The paintings that are also have those protrusions or whatever, they're not quite paintings, they're not quite sculptures because they hang like a painting. They're not freestanding. To me, they just look like very bright Jetson. like they would, if the Jetsons were real people, that work would be hanging in their home. It's very slick, very modern looking.
Yeah.
Very futuristic.
Yeah. He said, he's attributed as saying a sculpture is just a painting cut out and stood up somewhere, which is a very painterly way to think about sculpture because that's not what a sculpture is at all.
Yeah, I don't like that. I mean, that's like saying a still life. Yeah, that's just the same thing as somebody standing. Yeah, that's why it's a still life.
Yeah. But I mean, if you take that quote of his and you look at his sculptures, I mean, if I was to take a flat thing and then take the elements of it and then just kind of like bend them and wrap them, you would have his sculptures pretty much.
See, his mouth gets him into trouble with me. I don't like that. I don't like how he phrased that. Just make your work, man. Don't talk.
Yeah. But he's another one of those artists where, like, some of his sculptures I like because they're very pretty, they're very nice, they're very well done. But also, he doesn't do any of the large stuff. He makes a maquette, sends it to a fabricator, and the fabricator takes apart the maquette and then builds it.
Does he know how to do it?
No, it's all metalwork and stuff like that. I doubt he could weld or fabricate on that scale.
That's frustrating.
It is frustrating because, and I think one of the reasons why I have such a pushback against it is because it then means that in order to make work of that style, if that becomes the norm of like high-end sculpture, it completely cuts out anybody who doesn't have money.
Yeah.
Like, oh no, you can't even compete in that arena because you can't afford the $20,000 or $40,000 to pay the fabricator.
But then I'm also kind of torn because, like, if you want to do sculpture, do sculpture. Don't pigeonhole yourself just because you've done painting, but also do it the right way.
Well, and that's the other side of the coin is like, I can't, like, if I wanted to do glass, I can't blow glass real good. I'm not going to be great at it. And if I had a great idea that needed glass, then yeah, I should just pay a professional glass blower to do it. Like,
but you can't say that you made it. If you do a sketch and then you have a glass blower, to me, the glass blower made it.
But it's my vision, my concept, my work of art. When Lin-Manuel Miranda writes Hamilton, he doesn't go out there and do all the parts.
No, but he wrote the lyrics.
Yeah, but other people sang it. He's still the guy who made it.
That's apples and oranges. He wrote the lyrics. He wrote the music. No, of course he can't do all the parts because you physically cannot do that. Right. But he could. If he was able to take breaks in between and then cut the film to then have him appear in different outfits and sing the different parts, he could.
But it wouldn't be as good.
It wouldn't be as good. No, but he could do it. That's the difference. He could do it. The same as if you had the money to send off a piece to a welder to get it done while you worked on something else, that's okay because you know how to weld. You know how to do it. But if you can't, I don't think you should be able to send it off. And glass blowing is so intimate. You are blowing on that tube. You are forming it as it's hot. Like,
I mean, that's like saying that, any art is intimate because you're working on it. Your hands in it, you're doing it.
You are, yeah.
Yeah, but, I mean, if you don't have the ability to work a medium, what do you just, I guess I'll never use that? I'm going to pigeonhole myself to the thing
That's why
that
I just said there is a difference, though, because you shouldn't pigeonhole yourself, but you should do it the right way. Well, it's just like, that's like saying Chuck Close, you can't paint anymore because you had that terrible accident. No, I figured out a way. He had a contraption attached to his hand so that he could continue painting. Or Jahuli, didn't he go blind or something?
Yeah, but that's completely different.
It's not.
If I have a sculpture that I want to make in marble, I should just not do it because I can't carve. That's basically what you're saying. Instead of...
If you're not willing to learn...
I'm sorry, I don't want to give up another 10 years of my life to learn how to do marble just so that I can hire someone to do it well.
I don't know. I don't like it. I don't think it's respectable.
And that's why I'm always on the fence with these kind of things because, like, in the one sense, I don't like it. In the other sense, I understand it. And
I can understand it, but I don't have to like it.
Yeah. But, yeah, some of the sculptures I just don't like. They're so busy. And, like, super colorful and super busy and super layered. And it's just...
I think that's another thing that irks me is I want to like them because they're so bright and colorful. As a kid who was growing up in the 90s, I had Lisa Frank everything. Folders... T-shirts, erasers. I am still a card-carrying lifetime member of the Lisa Frank fan club. But I just don't like his stuff. And maybe it's because she used, like, a different...
Unicorn? Cat unicorn?
I was a fan of the cats and the dolphins. Thank you very much.
Sorry. Maybe it's because she used cats and dolphins and he doesn't.
I think it's also because she used a different color palette. It was still rainbow, but it was very much that...
Magenta?
Yeah, it was very much, it wasn't red, it was magenta. And it wasn't blue, it was cerulean. Whereas his are all primary colors. So maybe that's the difference.
Day glow. There's a good amount of day glow.
He did use a lot of orange, and I hate orange.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. What do you mean he is an important figure to know about as an artist? And, like, I see a lot of his influence especially in, like, the minimalists, in contemporary painting, a lot of, like, geometrical patterning.
Yeah.
I see a lot of influence in that. Even, like, we were getting breakfast the other day and they had a picture of a cow that was done out of those, like, it was like, someone drew a cow picture and they painted it and then they took large splotches of, like, colored paint and they, like, spray painted that one patterned area. I see a lot of influence from Frank Stella and that stuff. And the color choice and, like, the patterning that they use. Yeah. I can kind of draw a line from A to B there. And a lot of decor art as well.
Did you ever see the movie Art School Confidential?
Yes. I think every artist in art school has to watch that movie.
Even if you're not an artist or in art school, you should watch it because it's hilarious. Very dry sense of humor.
But the jokes are so much more funny when you get them all. Because you know the kid that they're referencing. You're like, yeah, I know that person.
Yeah.
Hey, is that me?
You're the mom who just had her last kid graduate and leave the nest. So now you're coming back to school. I knew several of them. And I love them all dearly. But the reason why I brought it up is because I love the teacher where he was doing the triangles. Do you remember that?
It's been a while.
He did paintings and they were geometric triangles. And the kid goes to his house and he's like, he's very awkward because he's at his professor's house to meet him and his wife or whatever. And the teacher comes in, and the kid had seen his paintings of the geometric triangles. Very Frank Stella-esque. I feel like it was a subtle nod to Frank Stella.
Probably.
And he goes, how long have you been doing the triangles? And the professor goes, I was one of the first. And that part kills me every time, because it's just like, oh, I would never have known, because who the hell does geometric triangles? But people are probably thinking the same thing with Frank Stella. Why would you do geometric squares? Like, to me, it's very boring, but it pushed it.
It did, and it's not just that it's a square; it's that he has those parallel lines, and he's playing with the intersection of line and value and color on the flat plane. And that, I when I look at it, I like it. It's well done. It looks good. Like, he's doing all those fundamental things that I tell all my students to do.
Yeah.
And he's doing it like in an extremely good way.
Extremely clean. It's, like you said, well done, executed well. Good craftsmanship. I can appreciate the craftsmanship. I just don't care for the subject matter.
Yeah. But another thing you have to think about is, in 1960, who else is doing that?
Very true.
And able to go up there and give a 6-minute interview where you sound kind of douchey as you talk about it.
He really did. It gets under my skin. I was rewatching it right before this just so I could have a refresher, and I found myself just skipping ahead. Like, nope, can't hear you talk about this again.
He also, Frank Stella is, I think he's Jewish.
Maybe.
From New York, and
he's definitely from New York, yeah.
Nasally, very fast pitch way of talking, New Yorker style lingo, which I watched it again too, and I was like, slow down, guy. I can barely take in what you're saying.
I can understand the fastness because I talk pretty fast when I get really excited, but it's just that nasally New Yorker, oh yeah, I can do this, and I've done that. I'm like, shut up.
I'm gonna go to the deli and get myself a sandwich.
Which people probably think the same thing with my Texan accent. Who knows?
Y'all.
I do say y'all.
Y'all be blessed.
I never said that. Although,
I doubt that.
I've never said y'all be blessed. That's not... We say bless your heart. Get the Texan lingo right.
Sorry, I'm not from here. I don't know these things.
Although, whenever I'm on the phone with clients, I make sure to milk my accent because people are a lot nicer when they think you're from the deep south. So it does come out a lot. I'm the southern version of Frank Stella. Well, that's been our kind of overview of Frank.
Yeah, it's one of the things we talked about too when we do these little overviews of an artist, is to not focus so much in on...
We didn't want to do a repeat of Keith Haring where it's just a giant schmooze fest because we love him so much. We didn't want to do that, but we don't want to have to research somebody we hate. That's not fun. No. So I'm kind of glad we went with the middle ground of Frank.
Yeah, and also, his importance is, his contribution to the movement of painting in the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
And that idea of, looking at his work, whether you like it or not, having an understanding that, no, he's important because he was able to push the medium forward. He was able to push ideas and concepts about painting forward.
And he was using paints that, like Pollock, acrylic was brand new.
Yeah.
When Pollock started using them, he had to make his own. Frank was using things that just weren't thought of when it came to making artwork. Right. And I think that's something he should get credited with, is pushing that forward as well.
Yeah, and
unconventional medium.
Right. And now you hear that and you're like, who cares? Everybody does that.
But it just wasn't a thing then.
Right. Nobody thought, no professional artist would do that then, because that's just not what was done.
Yeah.
And a lot of those guys in the 60s and 70s who you see and you're like, I don't get it. Who cares? Their stuff isn't that important. Well, it was then. Because it just wasn't. The ideas and concepts that they were putting forward, weren't had or were suppressed by the institutions.
Yeah. And I am glad that we chose somebody from the 60s that isn't Andy Warhol.
Yeah.
I definitely want to try to focus on artists that... we kind of messed up picking Keith Haring, because everybody loves Keith Haring from the 80s and 90s, but...
He was on Channel 11.
I know, I love him. So, and I mean, I'm sure we'll pick other ones that are kind of obvious, but I am glad we did somebody who's a little more underground in terms of a broader perspective knowing who he is.
Yeah, and chances are, if you look up Frank Stella's work, you'll be like, oh, I've seen that in a museum.
Yeah.
Because
or I recognize something like that.
Yeah, because especially you've been to any of the major museums. Because that's, I mean, I go into all kinds of museums, and I can usually be like, oh, look, there's a Frank Stella. Because he's widely collected.
Prolific,
He's prolific, and he's been doing it for 60-some-odd years now.
Yeah.
So.
Well, next time we'll pick an artist that we're a little more passionate about, so. Or at least that I will be more passionate about, so it won't be so combative because I don't like
our next artist is Orlan, isn't it?
I know we've talked about her before. I don't think we've settled on anybody just yet.
I'm trying to settle on Orlan so that you can talk all about it, and then I can be the one like, yeah, but I don't get her.
I do have that book that's in my to-read book pile that is forever growing that I should read them. Maybe it'll force me to finally read it.
Yeah.
But thank you for listening. This was our episode on Frank Stella. Lisa Frank Stella.
You just put that together?
I've had wine.
You didn't realize that Frank Stella is actually Lisa Frank in a wig?
No, because if you look at a picture of Lisa Frank, she is straight up on cocaine.
Frank Stella, no, I don't know that.
No. He looks like a cute little old Jewish man from the deli.
He does. He reminds me of the grandpa from Rugrats a little bit.
I can see that, yeah. All right, here's our third attempt at leaving the podcast. Thank you so much for listening. I am Joanna Bolsons.
And I am Andrew Malcheski.
And Minky.
And hopefully you're still you. Thank you for listening to our podcast. It means so much that you would take the time to listen to us. If you like what you hear and would like to help us out, please like, comment, and subscribe. We want to have a conversation, and sometimes that means that as we talk about things, we might make mistakes, like in the pronunciation of names or the misattribution of statements or a piece of work, and messing up titles and dates. If we do, and we notice, we'll put a correction in the show notes, and if we don't, please let us know so we can.
We invite you to join the conversation, so please get in contact. Email us your favorite artwork, ask us to explore a specific artist, or ask how something is made. You can find us at www.artsplanations.com. There you can also find out more about us, the show, and each episode. You'll be able to find out every artist, quote, and most of the specific vocabulary we use in each episode, as well as a list of upcoming topics. If you are curious about our artwork, the best place to find us is on our Instagram and other social medias, which are linked through the Artsplanations website.
We would also like to thank the Joy Drops, a free music archive for our music.